July 25th, 1945. The little White House, Babelsberg, outside Berlin. Morning light lies across the quiet waters of the Griebnitz Sea. But inside the borrowed villa where President Harry S. Truman is staying, there is no peace. The air is warm. Windows stand open to a Germany still smelling of brick dust, burned timber, damp gardens, and ruin. Only a few miles away, Berlin has been broken open by artillery and street fighting. Its shattered buildings are the remains of one war. Inside this house, another kind of war is taking shape. At 9:20 in the morning, Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten arrives to see the President. At 10 o'clock, General George C. Marshall follows. Truman receives them as the new Commander-in-Chief, a position he has held for barely 3 months since Franklin Roosevelt's sudden death. He is 61 years old, a former artillery officer from Missouri, a man who still writes letters to his wife Bess with the plainness of someone who never expected to hold the power now resting on his desk. Outside, American soldiers guard the drive. Staff officers move through corridors with folders tucked beneath their arms. Cars wait to carry the President to Sicilienhof Palace, where Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill are seated across the conference table, arguing over borders, reparations, Poland, Germany, and the shape of the world after victory. But Truman's most important burden this morning is not on the official conference agenda. It began 9 days earlier in the New Mexico desert. At 5:29 on the morning of July 16th, a device called Trinity exploded above the Jornada del Muerto. In a single blinding instant, the secret laboratory work of Los Alamos became a weapon. The desert flashed brighter than sunrise. A rising column of fire and dust climbed into the sky. Men who had spent years calculating its force were left staring in silence at what they had made. The coded report reached Truman at Potsdam. The experiment had succeeded, not partially, not uncertainly. The United States now possessed an atomic bomb, and more were being prepared. Across the Pacific, on the island of Tinian, technicians of the 509th Composite Group are assembling the machinery of delivery. 29 Superfortress bombers stand on sun-baked runways beneath the tropical glare. Colonel Paul Tibbets and his crews train for missions unlike any ever flown before. In secure buildings, guarded more closely than any aircraft on the island. Components are arriving for a bomb whose destructive force no city has yet experienced. Japan is still fighting. On Okinawa, the cost of victory has been written in blood. Wrecked landing craft, burned tanks, and thousands of graves. American planners look toward an invasion of the Japanese home islands and see beaches crowded with defenders, civilians mobilized with spears, aircraft turned into suicide weapons, and casualties on a scale no president wishes to announce to the nation. Yet the bomb is not simply another shell, another incendiary raid, another larger load carried by a bomber. Truman understands enough to feel the difference. Later that day, in his private diary, he reaches for words heavy enough to describe it. He calls it the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. His thoughts travel beyond laboratories and target charts, beyond generals and aircraft. He imagines an ancient destruction, a fire capable of consuming more than armies. Then his pen moves to the decision itself. The weapon, he writes, is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. He states that he has instructed Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson to employ it against military objectives, against soldiers and sailors, not women and children. He tells himself that Kyoto, Japan's ancient capital, and Tokyo, its present capital, are not to be destroyed by this terrible bomb. In the room, the statement may feel like restraint. On paper, it is something else. It is the moment an American president accepts that atomic fire can be released in war. Truman does not make a speech. There is no dramatic signature beneath a proclamation announcing that the nuclear age has begun. There are no cameras in the room when the authority passes quietly from political judgment into military preparation. Instead, there is a diary page, conversations with Stimson and Marshall, and a weapon already moving toward readiness. At 10:35, Truman leaves the little White House for Cecilienhof Palace. Minutes later, he steps into the garden beside Churchill and Stalin. Photographers call for the three leaders to face the cameras. Truman adjusts himself for the picture. Churchill stands solidly in his light-colored uniform. Stalin watches from beneath his cap. Unreadable, the shutters click. To the world, it is an image of Allied victory. Only Truman knows that behind his composed expression sits a secret powerful enough to end the war, alter diplomacy, and place upon one man the authority to unleash a weapon no human being has ever used against a city. And before this day is over, that authority will no longer be theoretical. Inside the rooms reserved for the American delegation, the machinery of decision is already moving. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson is 77 years old, thin, disciplined, and exhausted by the weight of what has come into his hands. He has served presidents before Truman was a national figure. He has watched armies rise, governments collapse, and casualty estimates mount in confidential files. Yet the report from New Mexico has placed something entirely new before him. The test has worked beyond expectation. On his desk are pages describing the flash, the heat, the towering cloud, and the force measured across the desert. Men who witnessed Trinity have compared it to the end of the world. Stimson cannot allow himself that language in meetings. He must convert terror into policy, schedules, target discussions, and orders. General George C. Marshall understands the other side of the equation. He knows the maps of Kyushu and Honshu. He knows the invasion planning, Operation Olympic. The proposed assault on southern Kyushu is scheduled for November. Behind it stands Operation Coronet, the larger landing near Tokyo, planned for the following spring. Divisions, transports, landing beaches, replacement drafts, hospital beds, shipping tonnage, ammunition stocks. All of it is moving toward a campaign no one can predict cleanly. The Japanese army has not collapsed. Its aircraft may be fewer, its navy shattered, its cities burned by B-29 raids, but its leaders have not accepted surrender. On Okinawa, Japanese resistance continued until organized defense had been crushed in caves, ravines, and ruined villages. Kamikaze aircraft had hurled themselves into American ships, tearing open steel decks and killing sailors in fire and smoke. To Marshall, an invasion of the home islands is not a phrase in a memorandum. It is Okinawa enlarged beyond imagination. And now, on July 25th, a different route is placed within reach. The language prepared for the field commanders is brief, almost cold enough to hide what it means. General Thomas T. Handy, serving in Washington as acting Army Chief of Staff while Marshall is at Potsdam, is to send the directive to General Carl Spaatz, commander of the United States Army Strategic Air Forces in the Pacific. The 509th Composite Group is ordered to deliver its first special bomb as soon as weather permits visual bombing after about August 3rd. 4 targets are named: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, Nagasaki. They are not empty military installations standing apart from human life. They are cities. Rail lines run through them. Factories operate inside them. Soldiers are present in them. So are homes, hospitals, schools, streetcars, shrines, mothers boiling rice, children sent into the countryside or kept near their families, old men watching an empire move toward disaster. In Potsdam, Truman has written that the target should be military and that women and children should not be harmed. He may believe the weapon can be directed against war-making structures, with the distinction still possible between soldier and civilian. But the officers handling the target list know the scale of the bomb makes such separation impossible. One name is missing. Kyoto had been considered. It was a major city, an industrial center, and a target planners believed would clearly reveal the power of the new weapon. But Stimson had fought against its selection. He had visited Kyoto years before. He understood its temples, its history, its place in Japanese civilization. He argued repeatedly that destroying it would deepen hatred after the war and damage any chance of governing a defeated Japan. So Kyoto is removed. Nagasaki takes its place. A city is spared by one old statesman's insistence. Another city enters the line of fire. Far from the shaded conference grounds of Potsdam, Tinian Island roars beneath aircraft engines. The runways are among the largest in the world, carved into coral and crowded with silver B-29s. Mechanics work stripped to undershirts in the heat. Military police protect fenced compounds. Specialized crews practice loading shapes and weights designed to resemble the bomb without revealing its secret. Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, Jr. knows his unit has been built around a single mission. His men have trained at Wendover Field in Utah, dropping specially shaped practice bombs and learning turns sharp enough to escape the blast after release. Many still do not know exactly what weapon they are preparing to carry. They know only that it matters enough for security officers to watch every conversation. In a secure assembly building, the components for the uranium bomb, called Little Boy, are nearly ready for their journey into history. No Japanese response has yet answered the ultimatum that will soon be issued from Potsdam. No atomic aircraft has yet lifted from Tinian. No city has yet disappeared beneath that white flash. But on this day, the distance between a presidential decision in Germany and a bomb bay in the Pacific becomes frighteningly small. A typed order begins its passage through military channels. The terrible secret is becoming a mission. The typed order does not carry Harry Truman's signature. It does not need to. The president has been informed. The president has agreed. Henry Stimson and George Marshall understand his will. And from that point, the command structure performs the work it was designed to perform. General Handy's directive travels toward General Spaatz. Spaatz will pass the operational responsibility downward. On Tinian, Colonel Tibbets and the 509th will wait for a target, a weather report, and the final readiness of the bomb. Yet the most revealing words are not in the military order. They are in Truman's own handwriting. A day earlier, on July 24th, Sicilienhof Palace had been crowded with uniforms, interpreters, advisors, maps, ashtrays, and the careful tension of men dividing the remains of Europe. The palace itself had survived the destruction that consumed much of nearby Berlin. Red brick walls, carved wood, quiet lawns, and flower beds surrounded statesmen discussing occupation zones and governments, while millions of displaced people searched for food and shelter across the continent. Truman sat across from Joseph Stalin, knowing something the Soviet leader had not yet been officially told. The atomic test had succeeded. The United States possessed a weapon capable of changing not merely the final campaign against Japan, but the balance among the victorious powers gathering in that room. Winston Churchill had been waiting for the moment. The British Prime Minister, informed of the Trinity success, understood immediately what the news might mean in dealing with Stalin. Churchill watched the Soviet leader with suspicion, sharpened by years of alliance born from necessity, not trust. Japan still fought. But the future contest over Europe was already casting its shadow across the conference table. The plenary session ends late in the afternoon. Chairs shift against the floor. Papers are collected. Translators step back. Advisors begin to move toward the exits. In that ordinary confusion, Truman walks toward Stalin. There is no announcement, no prepared address, no gathering of generals to witness the transfer of power from the old world into the atomic one. Truman speaks casually, as if passing along one more fact among dozens exchanged at Potsdam. The United States, he tells Stalin, has a new weapon of unusual destructive force. He does not say atomic bomb. He does not describe the desert flash in New Mexico or the shock wave spreading over sand and steel. He does not reveal the uranium weapon approaching readiness on Tinian, nor the list of Japanese cities under consideration. Stalin listens through the interpreter. His expression barely changes. He tells Truman he is glad to hear it and hopes the Americans will make good use of it against the Japanese. Then the conversation ends. Truman turns away, believing the Soviet leader has failed to understand the significance of what he has just been told. Churchill, watching closely, reaches the same conclusion. Stalin has shown no surprise, no urgency, no demand for information. But Stalin already knows. Soviet intelligence has carried reports from inside the Manhattan Project to Moscow. The Soviet premier does not need Truman to explain that an atomic weapon is real. Behind his still face, he understands enough to direct his own officials to accelerate Soviet work on the bomb. The moment is quieter than history will later make it seem. No threat is spoken aloud. No city is named. Yet Truman has allowed the existence of the weapon to enter great power diplomacy before it has ever been used in war. The bomb is no longer only an instrument intended for Japan. It has become a message placed carefully before Stalin, a warning hidden inside an almost casual sentence. That night, Truman returns to the little White House. The rooms are still. Guards remain posted outside. Staff officers continue their work beneath lamps and behind closed doors. Somewhere on his schedule lies another conference session, another meeting over Europe's borders, and the terms Japan may soon be offered. But Truman's diary opens onto the matter he cannot put aside. He writes of the bomb as a terrible thing. He records his hope that it will be used against soldiers and military objectives. He insists within those pages that women and children will not be the target. Then comes the central fact. He has told Stimson to use it, not after a new vote, not after another public debate, not after Japan sees the warning and has time measured in months. The bomb is to be employed if Japan does not accept surrender. In the silence of a villa outside ruined Berlin, Truman has crossed a line no president before him could ever have crossed. His words remain measured, almost restrained. His pen does not tremble across the page, but across the world, on a Pacific island filled with bombers, mechanics, and armed guards, men are preparing to turn those words into fire. July 26th, 1945. Babelsberg, Germany. In the heat of the afternoon, paper becomes a weapon. At the American headquarters near Potsdam, typists strike keys beneath the low hum of conversation and the rustle of documents. Officers carry drafts from room to room. Words are weighed, removed, restored, and approved by men who understand that the message must travel thousands of miles, across Allied transmitters and Japanese listening stations, into a government surrounded by burning cities and shrinking choices. Harry Truman is preparing to demand Japan's surrender. Not a negotiation, not an armistice, not a pause while diplomats search for a compromise. Surrender. The declaration is issued in the names of the United States, Great Britain, and China. Joseph Stalin's name does not appear. The Soviet Union is not yet at war with Japan, and in the conference rooms of Potsdam, that absence matters. Truman knows Stalin has promised to enter the Pacific War. He also knows the atomic bomb may make Soviet intervention less necessary than it seemed only weeks before. For the Japanese government, the message begins with defeat described in terms impossible to soften. Germany has surrendered. Allied power is now free to concentrate upon Japan. The armies, air fleets, and naval forces gathered against the empire are immeasurable. Resistance, the declaration warns, can bring only complete destruction. The pages move toward approval. Truman reads language promising that Japan will not be destroyed as a nation, nor enslaved as a people. Its military forces will be disarmed. War criminals will face justice. Occupation will continue until the country can no longer make war. Eventually, Japanese soldiers will be permitted to return home, and the Japanese people will be allowed to establish a peaceful government. But one subject hangs above every sentence: the emperor. For years, Millions of Japanese subjects have been taught that Emperor Hirohito is more than a constitutional ruler. His position stands at the center of military obedience, public identity, and the state itself. American officials know that the fate of the throne may influence whether Japan surrenders or fights until its cities are destroyed one after another. Stimson has considered that problem carefully. Some American officials believe surrender might be obtained more quickly if Japan is assured that the emperor can remain under Allied authority. Others fear any such assurance will appear to weaken the demand for unconditional surrender. Anger in American public hardened by Pearl Harbor, Bataan, and the brutal island campaigns. The final declaration says nothing clearly about Hirohito. It leaves the palace in Tokyo staring into a silence that may mean preservation, removal, trial, or execution. Then comes the final paragraph. The Allies call upon the Japanese government to proclaim the unconditional surrender of all its armed forces and to show good faith in carrying out that surrender. The alternative, the declaration states, is prompt and utter destruction. The phrase is broadcast toward Japan. It does not say that one aircraft may soon carry one bomb powerful enough to devastate a city. It does not reveal that Little Boy is nearing readiness on Tinian. It does not tell Japanese ministers that 4 cities have already been named in an American order, or that Hiroshima now stands exposed beneath a decision made in rooms half a world away. In Tokyo, the declaration reaches leaders trapped between military reality and political paralysis. Japan's navy is crippled. Its merchant shipping has been strangled. Food grows scarce. Entire urban districts have been burned by incendiary attacks. Yet members of the ruling council still argue over conditions, mediation through Moscow, and the possibility that enough bloodshed might force better terms from the Allies. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki faces reporters on July 28th. His government is not ready to accept the declaration. It is not ready to announce surrender. Before the microphones, Suzuki uses a word that will pass into history, mokusatsu, to ignore, to treat with silent contempt, to withhold comment, whatever shade of meaning he intends. The message received by Washington is unmistakable. Japan has not surrendered. At Potsdam, Truman has already authorized the bomb's use. The ultimatum has not created the decision. It has placed one last public doorway before the Japanese government while the military order advances behind it. No acceptance comes through that doorway. On Tinian, men begin looking toward the weather over Hiroshima. August 5th, 1945. North Field, Tinian Island, Mariana Islands. The island is awake beneath a black Pacific sky. Heat rises from the concrete even before sunrise. Floodlights spill across the enormous runways of North Field, cutting white paths through darkness and dust. Engines cough, grind, and roar to life as ground crews move beneath the wings of B-29 superfortresses. Men in sweat-darkened uniforms haul equipment, check fuel loads, and speak in short voices made harsh by fatigue. For months, this island has been a launch point for destruction. B-29s have lifted from Tinian in formations so large they seem to fill the horizon, bound for Japanese cities with incendiaries packed into their bomb bays. Crews have returned with aircraft torn by flak, engines smoking, men wounded or missing. But tonight, one bomber stands apart. Its aircraft number is 82. Its polished aluminum fuselage reflects the work lights. Earlier that day, Lieutenant Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, Jr. has chosen a name for it, painted beneath the cockpit in dark letters. Enola Gay, his mother's name. To most men on the island, it is merely another B-29 preparing for a special mission. To the officers gathered in secure briefing rooms, it is the final link in a chain stretching from a desert explosion in New Mexico through Truman's rooms at Potsdam, across the communications channels of the War Department, and now into the hands of a 12-man crew. The order has been waiting since July 25th. General Karl Spaatz was authorized to send the first special bomb against one of 4 cities after approximately August 3rd, whenever weather permitted visual bombing. No blind attack through cloud. No uncertain radar release. The weapon is too rare, the mission too important, and the political consequences too enormous. The target must be seen. Weather delayed the mission. Cloud systems moved across Japan. Men watched reports arrive and pass through headquarters. Then, on August 5th, the forecast becomes acceptable. The primary target is selected. Hiroshima. It is a city spread along river channels, its bridges and streets forming visible aiming points from altitude. It contains military headquarters, communications facilities, storage areas, and troops. It also contains hundreds of thousands of civilians who have received no clear warning that their city has been selected for an atomic attack. Inside the briefing room, the crews are told what they need to know. Captain William Parsons, a naval ordnance specialist from Los Alamos, will serve as the mission's weaponeer. He has made a decision that speaks to the danger carried inside the bomb bay. Little Boy will not be fully armed during takeoff. A B-29 overloaded with fuel and a new weapon could crash on the runway. Parsons intends to complete the arming process in flight. Kneeling in the cramped body of the aircraft while it heads toward Japan, Major Thomas Farabee will be bombardier. Captain Theodore Van Kirk will navigate. Technical Sergeant Wyatt Dusenberry will keep watch over the engines. Staff Sergeant Robert Caron, positioned in the tail, will look backward into the darkness through gun sights meant to defend the aircraft if Japanese fighters appear. Some of them now learn what their bomb is. Not merely a larger explosive. Not a new incendiary. An atomic bomb, the first to be used in war. Tibbets gives orders without ceremony. The mission has been practiced too long for drama now. Behind him, men carry out last inspections. Fuel tanks are filled. Emergency equipment is checked. Cameras and scientific instruments are placed aboard accompanying aircraft. One B-29, the Great Artiste, will measure the blast. Another, later known as Necessary Evil, will record what follows. On the hard stand, Little Boy rests inside the Enola Gay's bomb bay. It is long, blunt, and ungainly. Unlike the neat shapes men imagine when they think of weapons that decide wars. Within its metal casing is uranium and a mechanism designed to force 2 subcritical masses together. If it functions as planned, a fraction of its material will release energy greater than thousands of tons of conventional explosives. No one on Tinian can know precisely what Hiroshima will look like afterward. They know only that the order has come. Near midnight, crewmen eat breakfast before the mission. Eggs, toast, coffee. Familiar food before an unfamiliar act. Chaplain William Downey stands before them and offers a prayer for men flying into danger, asking that they return safely. Then the crew walks out toward the aircraft. Cameras catch Tibbets smiling briefly near the cockpit. Mechanics step away from the engines. Propellers begin to turn, first slowly, then into roaring discs of wind and reflected light. At 2:45 in the morning on August 6th, the Enola Gay begins to roll. The bomber is heavy with fuel, and the single bomb placed aboard by presidential authority and military order, it gathers speed across the runway. For several tense seconds, the dark end of the island rushes closer, then the wheels lift. The aircraft climbs over the Pacific and turns north toward Japan. Behind it, Tinian fades into darkness. Ahead lies Hiroshima. August 6th, 1945. 31,000 feet above Hiroshima, Japan. Morning has broken clear over the city. Below the Enola Gay, Hiroshima spreads across the delta in green and gray, divided by the shining fingers of its rivers. Bridges lie exposed in the sunlight. Streetcars move along their routes. Soldiers report to headquarters. Factory workers begin another day under a sky that appears almost merciful after weeks of air raid alarms and distant destruction. At 8:15, Major Thomas Ferriby bends over his bomb sight. The aiming point settles into view. Colonel Paul Tibbets holds the B-29 steady. Captain William Parsons waits behind him. Captain Theodore Van Kirk watches the calculations that have brought them across the Pacific. Then Ferriby releases the bomb. Little Boy drops from the aircraft and begins to fall. The Enola Gay suddenly leaps upward, relieved of its burden. Tibbets throws the bomber into the sharp escape turn, rehearsed again and again over American desert ranges. Behind them, the uranium weapon descends toward a city whose people have no way to understand what is above them. 43 seconds pass. At an altitude of nearly 2,000 feet, the bomb detonates. A flash swallows the morning. For an instant, Hiroshima is flooded with a light fiercer than the sun. Roof tiles melt. Wooden houses burst into flame. Human shadows are seared into stone. A crushing wall of pressure races outward through streets and buildings, smashing hospitals, barracks, schools, offices, and homes into broken timber and dust. Inside the Enola Gay, the crew sees light flood the aircraft. Then the shock wave strikes. The bomber shudders violently. Men turn in their seats and look back, where the city stood. An immense column rises, boiling upward in colors of purple, gray, black, and red. Fire spreads beneath it. Smoke consumes neighborhoods. The familiar shape of Hiroshima disappears under a living cloud. Captain Robert Lewis, seated beside Tibbets, stares down at the ruin left behind. In the terrible silence after the blast, one thought forms in words that will follow the mission forever. My God, what have we done? Below them, survivors crawl from collapsed buildings into an altered world. People stagger through streets with burned clothing, blackened skin, and faces emptied of recognition. Fires join across the city. Medical stations are destroyed along with those meant to staff them. Water draws the injured toward the rivers. Children call for parents who will never answer. The bomb does not distinguish between the military objective Truman imagined in his Potsdam diary and the human beings living around it. It cannot. Thousands are already dead. Thousands more will die in the hours, days, and years ahead from burns, injuries, sickness, and the invisible effects of radiation scarcely understood by those who authorized the attack. Hours later, far from Hiroshima, the cruiser USS Augusta moves westward across the Atlantic, carrying Harry Truman home from the Potsdam Conference. The president is at lunch with members of his party when a message arrives from Secretary Stimson. The bomb has been dropped. The mission has succeeded. Truman shares the news with those around him. Men rise, applaud, and crowd forward to congratulate him. To exhausted Americans after years of war. The report carries the promise that Japan may finally surrender and that soldiers preparing for invasion may be spared the beaches of the home islands. A statement prepared before Truman left Europe is released to the world. It reveals that an American airplane has dropped one atomic bomb on Hiroshima. It declares that the weapon carries power greater than anything previously used in warfare. Then it turns the attack into a warning. Should Japan refuse surrender, Truman says it may expect a rain of ruin from the air. The words travel across radio broadcasts and newspaper offices while Hiroshima burns. At Potsdam, the decision had been quiet. A diary entry, a meeting with Stimson, a military directive moving through official channels, a guarded remark to Stalin about a weapon of unusual destructive force. Now the secret has a name, atomic bomb. Now the authority Truman accepted has a visible result, one city shattered beneath one aircraft carrying one weapon. Japan does not surrender that day. In Washington and on Tinian, preparations continue. Another bomb waits. The Soviet Union is preparing to enter the war. The final days of the Pacific conflict are closing in with violence from every direction, but the line has already been crossed on July 25th in a villa outside ruined Berlin. Harry Truman had written that this was the most terrible bomb in history. and had accepted its use against Japan. On August 6th, above Hiroshima, the world discovered what those words meant.